Hello, assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you all, and welcome to another episode of the Healthy Mind Chat with me, Hasan Ali Khan. This is a platform where health and communication intersect. We speak about health and healthcare and everything surrounding it. And today is a episode, to be honest, didn't really want to speak about, and it's something that I didn't want to personally investigate too much, but one can't hide from the realities of the news, and and some things have to be, I think, addressed timely. Um, COVID-19 has brought with it its many consequences, its many issues that we probably were not prepared for. And then your one is watching the news, one is there's some bad news there on a daily basis, but then there's something that happens that just so different, and it hurts, and especially if you have some relation to it, that it hurts you in a very different way. um and about a couple of weeks ago, I was on social media and something pops up, and it was one of those news that you really don't ever want to read and don't ever want to see, but you do have to study. um and the case is of early 5th of April. Someone was on their social media and they read a message, and I'm just going to actually quote how this message actually started. And it starts with, "Hey everyone, I killed myself and my family," which begins, and this sentence begins uh, a long letter, uh, what seems to be a suicide note. And whoever read this message alerted the police, and sadly, sure enough, when the police entered the household of this person, there were 6 people who were dead by gunshot. And it turns out, and why this is why it kind of, where the relation part comes for me, is that this was a Muslim family, an immigrant Muslim family of America in Allen, Texas. Um, and those who have been killed are parents, mother and father, a grandmother, uh, a sister, and 2 brothers. And what it seems, and what we understand, and what this message says, is that the 2 brothers, and their names are uh, Farhan Towhid and Tanvir Towhid. I think Tanvir being the older brother of 21 years of age, and Farhan being 19, made a suicide and murder pact. And the conclusion from the letter, it seems, is that in order to attain happiness, it is better to die and to take with them those who they love as well. And I say attain happiness because a part of the letter says that they truly couldn't feel happy. And because they can't feel happy, then what's the point of living? Um, it's a very complicated letter, and it comes with a lot of emotions. So I just wanted to kind of, before anyone wants to continue with this, this may be a very triggering conversation. We do deal with self-harm, suicide, um, and mental health diseases. Is this something you do not wish to speak to listen to? You can definitely turn this message off. For those who continue, there is a lot that we can learn today. And today, joining me, I have a wonderful guest that I look up to a lot, and he is someone who can relate to, probably, to this case in many ways. Um, uh, his name is Sheikh Sohail Mullah. He's a director of the Los Angeles branch of the Khalil Center, which is a community spiritual and psychological wellness center. Sheikh Sohail currently serves as resident scholar at the Islamic Society of West Valley in Canoga Park, California. He also serves as the IOK Muslim chaplain at both UCLA and CSUN. Sheikh Sohail has worked as a social worker in LAUSD and Silmar Juvenile Court, and has served as an imam at the Islamic Society of Orange County, and interim executive director and director of mental health at Access California Services. Along with being a social worker at the level that he has been working at, he's also someone who graduated from Azhar University in Egypt, and for those of us in the Muslim community in America and globally, we know him as Sheikh, as an imam, as someone who's a spiritual leader. And I think having Sheikh Sohail here today with us it will allow us to not only understand this from the mental health point of view, but to also understand from the social point of view, from the and what it means for immigrant Muslims, and then the wider minority context. Sheikh Sohail, welcome.
Thank you, Hasan, for having me. This is a heavy topic, but I'm glad you're addressing it.
We truly appreciate your presence, sir, and taking the time out to discuss this. As you said, this is a very heavy topic, and you know, I usually start this conversation with my guests is that what's the reflection of the past year of COVID-19. But with you and for this particular topic, I would really like to know your reflections as you saw the news come in to your social media feed and news outlets. What did you, what were your thoughts, immediate thoughts, sir, and how did you start to address this?
You know, I think there's a lot of things that went through my mind, and maybe I'll just list them out. Mm-hmm. Felt heavy, I felt that this was a case that reached national headlines, so there was some interesting implications there. It was a murder-suicide, which was something perhaps unique to as compared to other suicides we've seen in the Muslim community in particular. That's where my kind of main intersection is with. And you know, I felt really sad to see that two parents, a grandmother, and 3 children of those parents died in this horrific, tragic incident. To know that there were people that had that at least the young man who wrote the letter, Farhan, had some it's what seems to be some severe depression, but then to take all of these other people with him, that was something really, really heavy to swallow. And the other thing, you know, after even further reflection, what was really mind-boggling about this case in particular is that it was 2 brothers who went into a pact together, which I don't know if I've ever heard of such a thing, mm-hmm. to you know, wipe out their entire family because of their distress and because they were not because they weren't happy in life, etc. And I'm not saying they weren't happy in life in a you know, in a minimalizing way. That was the language that was used in the letter. And the fact that, you know, neither one of them prevented the other from carrying this out, right? That in those conversations they had, this was in their mind, the natural conclusion that they reached and the best way out for them. So that's mind-boggling that, you know, that people would find themselves so miserable that they would go to that extent. And without, like I said, without one person stopping the other or holding up the process or reporting to somebody or talking to somebody like, you know, help us figure this out. This is what we're thinking about, but we don't want to do, you know, and that didn't happen. So that part is really, that was heavy to see.
It definitely was, and to to kind of put it into context for our viewers about just general what the demographic is like for the Muslim community here in America. I think we're about 3.5 million, less than 1% of the American population. But very interestingly, the one could very broadly distribute the Muslim population into two parts. There's the native, indigenous, I guess, Muslim Americans, and then there's the immigrant population. And there's the immigrant population in particular that relatively does well, has been affluent. I think well, I was reading a study where I think 19% of the immigrant Muslim population speaks about, says they have a household income of 100,000 plus. For such a small population, which you would think are affluent, they have means. A lot of them come with all these different skills. We speak about the immigrant population as the doctors, as the engineers. It is easy to think things aren't wrong, but I think you and I both know, working in clinics and with our clients and stuff, that there's a lot of mental health issues that are underlying the surface of this community. Just, whether there's immigrant community or whether it's a native indigenous community of Muslims, there is a mental health issue that rarely gets discussed. But then, as you said, this was at some extreme level that we haven't come across. And I think for me it was I actually didn't know where to start with this. And this letter in particular, I'm not sure if you've ever read the book The Stranger by Albert Camus.
No.
It's the theme of it is existentialism, and this character who is basically this typical stereotype existentialist. And when I first read that book, I just really wanted to throw it away, but it was a school project, so I had to do it. In a way, I got those same feelings, because this is a character he writes why he's doing what he's doing, almost in this own calculated way, describing his emotions, but as he says in this whole thing, that he's this apathy that you get, he just doesn't feel things anymore. And I think maybe that extends to the idea where he is self-harming himself, and the cutting, which started early in his age. And not only that, his brother was going through the same thing. And then in his letter, he actually points out 4 reasons why he goes about doing this. And to quickly summarize, the first reason being that getting help is an issue. And when he reached out to people, people don't know how to help. The second issue is related to the misunderstanding. He's almost an advocate for mental health problems, and he speaks about the complexity of mental health and how it should be addressed and how poorly it's addressed. He also then speaks about, which is it took a weird turn, where he speaks about the TV show The Office. And what I understood was there was this mundaneness that what The Office is. It talks to the hilarity in the mundane reality. And he actually finds joy in that, but then he gets upset, and this leads to this idea that no happiness ever lasts, which then becomes the crux of why he and his brother thought committing suicide was the only way out. And lastly, he actually becomes this advocate for gun control, because how easily that they got the guns, and to be able to commit this act. It was very complicated. So Sheikh Sohail, how do we start with, if we can almost do an autopsy of this letter? What is this letter telling us?
That's a big question, right? There is a bunch of things that are mentioned in that letter, and I guess it is worth a bit of analysis, because he makes some very powerful points, and he makes he draws some very important conclusions about society. And I think the one that sticks out the most for me and intersects with my world the most is what he has to say about mental health.
Mhm.
Right? And so he paints a really interesting picture of what it means to be depressed, how other people aren't able to understand him, how many had tried but failed, how depression, the word shouldn't be thrown around so lightly. He made some references to that. Somebody said, I think, I think I failed my exam and I want to kill myself. So a reference to suicide, even though it wasn't meant in that way in which the person said, but why his point was, why are people throwing around these terms and these concepts and these ideas so loosely when this is my reality, that I am a person who suffers from real depression. Don't 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 compare what you're going through with what I'm really going through, and don't put that same label on it, right? So all of these different things that he talks about as it relates to depression, and as you said, he almost becomes an advocate for mental health, which is really interesting. He went through the mental health system, and I think there is one thing that's probably worth saying. He did talk about a couple of points in time where he felt some relief. And I'm not talking about when he was cutting himself and he said he felt relief. And that's an issue to discuss in and of itself, cutting and what that means and how that works and so forth. But where he got on certain medications, he got in some sort of mental health program and so forth, and he did find some relief at a couple of different points. And so he talked about his ups and downs on the journey of his mental health illness, his mental health disorder that he struggled with. And then he also, but his ultimate conclusion is like, I can't do it no more. I give up. I'm not happy. It was all in vain, and it was all for naught. And the only way out is to leave this world. Right? And so there's a lot there that I think a lot of people that struggle with mental health disorders can relate to. And so maybe we can pull some of that apart.
So let's start with the cutting and what that means, and why would someone do that, and why would someone at such a tender age do that? Like, because he started, I think, at the age of 9, I think, or ninth grade.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, unfortunately, it is a widespread, it is a common practice amongst young people. I can't say that I've studied the history of it and such to know, how long has this existed and so on and so forth, but it definitely does seem that it is something much more prevalent in this generation than it has been in previous generations. I could be wrong. It, I think social media has propagated the fact that this has become in young people speak, an acceptable practice, right? An acceptable means of releasing pain, something to do that will help alleviate your emotional pain and distress. And so it's become a thing. And it does, from a physiological standpoint, we have to acknowledge what he said and what other young people say, that it does become a way to relieve stress. And this is an important point. The mental health experts now, they say, when you find a young person who's cutting, don't tell them to stop cutting. This is really interesting. Don't tell them to stop cutting. If a parent finds their teenager cutting, don't focus on, you need to stop. Oh my God, what's what's going on? We need to remove the knives out of the house. We need to do this. We need to do that. That you need to talk about with them what is going on underneath the surface with them as a person emotionally. That's where the focus needs to be, and not on the practice of cutting itself. Because as the mental health experts say now, that cutting actually can have some value. It can be a preventative measure from somebody taking a further step of attempting suicide. And so that's why they say, you know, don't tell them to stop cutting. That's not where the focus should be. The focus should be on the emotional process, right? And I think a lot of immigrant parents would have no sense of that at all, right? They would be freaked out. And I mean, that's the visceral reaction. Of course, a parent is going to be very shaken up if they see their child cutting themselves, if they see blood, if they see these lines on their arm, and so on and so forth. But what needs to take place at that point in time, at that moment, you know, is with that parent, with that child, or that youth group leader, with that young person in their youth group, or whoever it may be, interacting with that other person, is, wow, you must have a lot going on. There must be some things going on in your life that are weighing really heavy on you. Would you care to talk? That's the approach. So yeah, and I think that's a really important narrative that needs to get out in the community. It's not about being freaked out about the practice, but it's about using it as a point in time to help a person get to another level of care potentially.
And as you say that, you bring up that point about the immigrant community. I'm not sure just the immigrant community. It's just, I'm just thinking about, you know, they had their grandmother, and these are people who've come from very different worlds. And I'm someone who grew up in the Middle East. I'm very still connected to my Eastern roots, as it were. This is alien speak for a lot of us. For a big fraction of, say, for the subcontinent community in particular, mental health disease is not something we equate. We don't put that into our daily lives. We don't even have the language for it. We don't even necessarily acknowledge it.
Right.
To then come into this country and facing these issues as we do, to now suddenly have a mature, not just to acknowledge, but to have a mature level of dealing with this. That's a tough thing to ask. And so how do we go about doing that?
Yeah. No, thank you for kind of checking me, right, about what I just shared. You know, there is a lot of things going on here, right? We're talking about people coming from different countries. If we're talking about a Muslim community coming from you know, South Asia, coming from the Middle East, and all these different places, they come to this country. That was a big process in and of itself. There was a lot of focus on the naturalization process. There was a lot of focus on getting educated, getting the job, getting situated, buying a home, learning the language, navigating life. And then you have children, and raising children is a big, massive venture. And a lot of times the emotional bandwidth by which to do that is kind of went really thin, went really narrow because of all of the previous realities that we talked about. Let alone if you're a refugee and you come from a place like Somalia or Yemen or Syria, or we have now in the US, we have some of our Uyghur brothers and sisters coming from, you know, Eastern Turkmenistan, what is considered Western China now, and tremendous trauma, tremendous, you know, literally oceans that have been crossed to find this new life. But the emotional bandwidth is really narrow now. And so to raise your children and to pay attention and to understand the new society in which you live in and the pressures that they face, and the very heavy influence of social media on young people to conform, to be cool, to be this, all of the realities surrounding sexuality and navigating that. And there's so much on people that sits on these immigrant families that when they come in, it is tough for them to pay attention to their kids and to kind of say, well, wait a second, but if you want to raise healthy children, if you want to raise children who are going to be emotionally whole, who are going to be who are going to be good students, even if that's the product, because that's a product that's what a lot of immigrant parents are looking for ultimately. We want our kids to be good students, we want them to be educated, etc. Well, even if that's your goal, which your child is more than just a student that you want to raise to have A's. They're your kid, and you want to have for them to provide them with their best life. But anyways, if you have that narrow vision, even that the emotional realm needs to be navigated. And so it's very important, that parents do sit with their children, they do understand their children, they spend time with their children. If they see their children engaged in things that are concerning to them, well, there's work to be done, and there's more. At that point, there's a lot more emotional investment that needs to be made with the children. Like if their children are smoking weed, if they're engaged in other sort of activities that are just not what they wanted for their kids, well, that means there's something going on in the emotional realm underneath the surface. And so that takes time, that takes effort, that takes energy. And so, but that's part of raising kids.
Mm-hmm. And the words that come to my mind is this it takes an extra level of consciousness that sometimes for us who especially come from the East, where I'm from a place called Bhopal in India. Although I grew up in the Middle East, my every summer I was in India, so I at least had some of that connection. And I literally have to step outside my house. I have 10 different households who know me and I know them, and almost like there's pseudo parenting happening from the neighborhood, which we don't get that necessarily here. And there's this disconnect, and as you mentioned this, so there's this idea that there needs to be much more consciousness when it comes to being parents. But it's not just of what's happening in the family. There's also this what's happening in school and the other environments that someone like Farhan and not only him, his older brother, who went through American high school, which I assume, I'm not sure if it's whether it's private or public, but for those of us, and again, I put on my Eastern lens or my non-American lens, we have a certain perception of American high school through the media, and almost there's this commercialization of what high school looks like, and it puts these notions forward that I think, these are my ideas, that maybe they become self-fulfilling prophecies of how an individual like Farhan should be at high school. And because when I read this, there's a certain sense of precociousness that I get from it, because I know at that age, maybe I'm slightly not that clever or not, but at that age, I wasn't thinking about these things. I had such much simpler notions of life and things. I just want to do this. I just want to play soccer. I want to do that. But there seems to be the sense of precociousness, which I think comes with the media attention or this media construction of high school. So, Sheikh Sohail, what's happening in high school, or rather what's not happening in high school in America, and what are the type of experiences that these children may be experiencing that may, obviously we can only speculate, in contributing to some of the factors that Farhan was addressing here, especially the apathy?
Some high schools are mini cities in and of themselves. You have 2, 3, 4, 5,000 students in most American public high schools in large cities. Those are standard numbers, right? So they're mini cities, like literally on the campus, there's like little mini streets where there's carts are whizzing by, and there's big food production, and there's, and of course it's an educational institution, but you have this massive crowd of young people moving from place to place. And they're multi-million dollar, tens of millions of dollars budget sort of institutions, right? So I say all of that to say that people get lost in that, right? You're just another person in the crowd, and there's no one paying attention to you. There's no one looking at you as an individual and saying, oh, this kid, he, at the beginning of the year, he seemed to be like, okay, he was getting by, but now is because they're massive institutions. And I've worked in the school system, and I've seen, I've seen the processes, and the processes are always intervention processes that are dealing with kids that have in many senses have, crossed certain levels of, have crossed into other levels that if there was some intervention earlier, they really could have, developed it. But now I don't want to say it's too late. I'm not saying that, but there's a need at every single level for kids to have various resources, support services, et cetera, et cetera. But my point was that, schools are just big places, man, where a lot of kids get lost. And that's why the real work needs to be at home. And that's what educators will tell you too. Say we're just doing our part to the best of our ability, but a parent is the number one person who's responsible for their child. And that doesn't mean just getting them ready to go to school in the morning, sending them off, and then receiving them at home and just making sure they have a meal on the table when they get home and a bed to sleep in, but it means dealing with them as a full person, right? So I go back.
Dealing with them as a full person, and it's this, and I think it's, again, school is sometimes for parents. As in what I actually had a discussion with an expert who was actually my professor at Northwestern, Dr. Alexandra. She's an expert in technology and the use of technology by children. And we were discussing how school is almost this surrogate parent that that after COVID we lost that, or lots of parents lost that. And I know in clinic a lot of parents didn't know how to deal with their children on a day-to-day basis. How do we deal with the boredom, and how do you deal with education and this, that, the other? It's a tough ask just on normal days, I guess. To move on from this, Sheikh Sohail, there's a point where he speaks about the people's inability to help, and even if they recognized it, they weren't doing a good job in helping him, I guess. And again, that's a very it's hard enough for experts, let alone for a layperson to address mental health diseases. But what can we say to someone who's 12, 13, 14, 15, even parents, some of which we've already addressed, but someone who is showing mental health problems or exhibiting or expressing ideas and thoughts which are not necessarily things that you would say are considered with, say, normal day-to-day or normal language, and I use this very loosely, very crudely. So how does one deal with that? How does one start to address that?
You're saying, how does one start to address that? You're talking about the adults in that individual? You're talking about other young people around it?
Both.
Yeah. So, there's a certain intelligence that a lot of people are lacking in. That's what we call emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence is the ability to read other people, to understand them, to vibe, to to pick up on people's feelings, and to be able to speak to them in the moment based upon where that other person is, not based upon just um, where your level of, if I'm sitting with someone else in front of me, I should be paying attention to them as opposed to just being oblivious and just talking about whatever I want to talk about, right? And so that real human connection that is meaningful, that is going to be lasting, that is going to be constructive, that is going to be um, uh, is going to uh, add value to another person's life, comes on that next level of connection, right? And so whether whoever you are in another person's life, and depending upon the role that you play in that other person's life, that it's going to vary your responsibility. um, but just let's say with your friends and your colleagues around you, or your family members, first and foremost, to be conscious of what's going on with them, to understand uh, their mood, to be able to um, uh, talk with them about their life on a deeper level, rather than just things that are very um, you know maybe don't have much. When we talk, if you want to connect with other people, you want to talk to them about what is meaningful to them,
Mm.
right? And that's why when you meet somebody, that's why the most intelligent, emotionally intelligent people are when they go to work and they know that this person has been married for so long. This other person has a kid that is struggling with depression. This other colleague of theirs is somebody who just got into a car crash and they're going through a certain, this other colleague of them, their wife was just diagnosed. You know what I'm saying? They know about people's lives, right? Um, I um, I think it's important that you know if we want to be better versions of ourselves, uh, part of I'm a Muslim, and my role model is the messenger of God, Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. He was a person who was absolutely in tune with what was going on with other people, right? And the examples of that are there in the literature are numerous. And so modeling ourselves after that pattern of conduct, off of being someone who is in tune with the person that you're talking to. Um, you know, uh, Again, this is my model, so I have to use him as my reference point. When he would sit and he would talk to a person, he would face them with his full body and his full posture. Like you don't talk to somebody out of the side of your head. Like you don't you have your full body turned to them. He would look at them. He would if it was appropriate, there would be a physical touch that was involved, right? And so um, some people that's natural for them. That all of that comes natural for them. For others, it doesn't. But that sort of connection is, I think I can't even remember what our original point or question was.
So, as in it, whether you're a parent, whether you're a friend at school, whether you're a teacher, I think what you're saying is that the starting point in starting to first just to recognize someone's going through a tough time
Yeah,
is to have this approach in the first place, to be able to be welcoming, paying attention to
yeah,
someone, to be in tune with them. For me, I think what that also speaks to is this question: how in tune am I with myself?
yeah, yeah,
And I think there's a lot of conversation, hopefully with maybe another session with yourself, sir. It's how do we have the internal dialogues?
yeah,
Because social media has draped us with this false sense of connection. In reality, what we're finding is that, it doesn't matter how much technology you can put in front of us. There is something about the human to human contact that we are now starting to realize in a more visceral sense with COVID-19 and lockdowns and so on and so forth. Um, it's very interesting. In my master's, I did my master's in health communication. One of our professors speaking about why uh, social isolation in jail is one of the most difficult punishments, uh, is because there's this, one can lose their own identity or sense of identity if there's no other to connect with, there's no other to communicate with.
Mm,
Because if I say hi and no one replies back with hello, do I
mm,
really even exist?
mm,
And I kind of use that as such a stark example, because that for me it kind of answered a lot of things when it comes to loneliness in communities and societies,
yeah.
that people, and I think what Farhan is kind of also exhibiting in this letter is that he was there, he was present, he was having this communication, but he wasn't receiving a meaningful response for him to then
Yes.
say, I'm someone. Is it with
Yes. Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a super important point that you
mm,
bring up, Hassan. Connection is everything.
mm-hmm,
And this pandemic has taught us anything, it's taught us that, right?
mm-hmm,
That if we're disconnected from the social reality of the world, there is a piece of us that's missing. A lot of children have struggled educationally um, during the pandemic because there is no the socialization aspect is missing, and it's hard because that is a part of us that's ingrained in us as human beings. It's an innate need,
mm-hmm,
and when it's not there, and when it's not there with people who are suffering with various mental illness, they, like this young man he talked about in his letter, I was so depressed and it was so apparent, and various people, slowly just started drifting away from me. Um, and, they couldn't really do anything for me. And so he was basically isolated at some point. There was no one who could, connect with him, capacity him for who he was. And he was ultimately so isolated, he was left to his own thoughts, his own devices, his own the machinations inside of his own head.
mm-hmm,
And that's not a good space to be in.
mm-hmm.
And so connection is of absolute importance. That's why for somebody to have a therapist in their life, um, when they're struggling in all of their other relationships, whether it be a relationship based reality, or they're dealing with some sort of mental illness, having a therapist in their life is that connection point. They have somebody that they're going and sharing their intimate realities of their life with. And that can be very powerful and meaningful for them in and of itself. Leave alone the curative and healing aspect and dialogue that they're going to engage in, and
Mm-hmm.
practices they may develop, and tools that they're going to hopefully gain from that engagement to improve their life. Just the connection itself
Mm-hmm.
is powerful and is meaningful.
So he makes a point about the purpose of life, and I just wanted to get your quick thoughts on reactions to what he was saying.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to quote what he says, that, and this is him trying to justify his suicide. That let's start with the meaning of life. Everyone thinks the meaning of life is this deep, unsolvable mystery, but the conclusion I came to it came to is really simple. The only reason for existence is simple. The only reason is happiness. In fact, every decision you make is solely because it contributes to your overall happiness. I know many of you will disagree with me. And then he starts to convey his reasoning. Even he speaks about those who do it for religious reasons. There's a selfishness about it. And then he says that what happens if you can't feel happy, and or your happiness doesn't last, your contentment doesn't last? Then his logical conclusion was, well, there's no point in living.
Yeah.
How, and your thoughts on that, sir?
Yeah. I mean, there is some, on some level, there's some validity to what he's sharing, right? Everybody is looking for happiness. Who wouldn't be, right? Who
Mm-hmm.
doesn't want to feel happy? Who doesn't want to feel good about themselves in the moment and all the time? Um, and the I think the um the nuances in, well, what does happiness mean and how is it achieved,
Mm-hmm.
right? And what I mean by that is, well, are you looking for an every moment of the day constant uh, happiness, at every single touch point in life? That type of personality, or that type of mindset, I should say, um, is going to lead to somebody who's absolutely over engaged with social media, and they need to just constantly be plugged in to get that high, so to speak, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
there's a connection, and they can laugh, they can see a funny video, and that's what the essence of these things are, on some level. Some of these new media platforms that come out, they're very quick hit, one 30-second clip of this and that, or 1 minute of this and that. Others who fall into that are people who need certain substances to feel that level of euphoria and happiness, right? And there are others whose definition of happiness as a marathon, not as a sprint. Their understanding is, well, I need to work hard so that I can support my family, so that I can put my kids through school, so that I can do this, so I can do that. And others whose understanding of happiness is, well, happiness is um, uh, the real, true, eternal happiness is not here in this world; it's in the next world. That's what I, as a Muslim, believe. It's what people of other faiths may also have a similar belief, and their lifestyle is patterned based upon that understanding in a certain way too, right? So happiness, yes, everybody's trying to see, but what does happiness mean? What is true happiness? What is and if you don't have happiness immediately, what do you do?
Mm-hmm.
How do you navigate? Um, do you go and somehow try to immediately seek it and find it? Do you readjust your life? Do you recalibrate? Do you understand that, okay, well, I need to put in a little more work before that? You know what I'm saying? So there's
Yes.
so much more to that discussion. Um, this young man, that was his conclusion that he came to, but uh, and I don't want to pass judgment on his immediate words per se. I guess I think there's a certain validity to that, but life is more complex.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much there's so much more to navigate beyond just a simple equation and what you do, and to be measured in that standard by and of itself. It is going to pose problematic in somebody's life. I mean, as it or out, played out in this young man's life.
Mm-hmm. Sheikh Sohail, there's a lot to that. I think there's almost, I'm thinking about part two to this, because there's obviously, he mentions about gun policies, and then there's something obviously we can speak about in policies at large when it comes to mental health diseases. And one of the reasons why I set this whole channel up is I started studying medicine, experiencing medicine in the UK, where we have a National Health Service.
Mm-hmm.
Coming to America, I am a commodity. Healthcare is not a right here. Healthcare is a choice. And here, especially now with COVID, that question really is put in front of our faces again. Then can we be choices? Are we not connected with one another? We each affect our health. But to respect time, sir, I actually wanted to speak about what we've, like, how do we take this forward? What are the things that, I guess, tips, things to look out for as a parent, as even as a clinician, you're dealing with minority communities, as any individual who may be going through something similar? How do we move forward from this? What should we be doing? Where are the resources that we should be accessing?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing, there's so many, that's a big question. And I think one thing I'll just focus on is preservation of life is number one. And I think that's a shared human value across the world, right? What I mean by that here is that for people that are working in the field of health, of mental health, ultimately that's what we're striving to do, is at the very end of the continuum is to ensure that people live, right? And that's what a doctor is striving to do with his patients, to keep them alive if they're in some sort of dire situation, etc. And the same thing in the field of mental health. And then you go down the line, and meaning, well, quality of life, helping people be connected socially, helping them build a social network, helping them, if they're trying to have a family, maybe somebody's trying to get married, all of these. So it's about, I think you work with people down that spectrum. You start at what is the biggest concern and the biggest risk. If that's fine, if you have that in order, then you move down and work with the person towards all of those other aspects of their life, right? And in the field of mental health, the experts, they say that it doesn't, when you talk to people about suicide, you are not, if you ask somebody, if you see somebody in your life, somebody and they're depressed and you're worried about them and they're doing things that are concerning and so forth, you're worried, like, was this person thinking of, taking their life or something? Like, you don't keep that, you ask them, are you thinking of taking your life? Are you contemplating suicide? You ask the question direct. Asking the question doesn't implant a notion in their mind that they didn't previously have. And so it is important when you see people in those very difficult sort of circumstances in life to be upfront with them, to be to have an overt, direct conversation with them, and address it directly. That's an important thing that anybody can do with someone in their life that they see maybe in a very dire sort of circumstance.
And to add to that, if I may, sir, is there is no shame in seeking help, and this mental health is something for us as Muslims that when we actually study the tradition of our Prophet Muhammad and the Islamic tradition, we have been addressing mental health issues since its inception, because we understand that human beings are not just the body. It comes with the mind, and it comes with its exercises and its experiences, and not every experience is a good one, and it comes with its complications. And there is absolutely no shame in seeking help, going to a therapist, even speaking to your family physician, who are also trained in addressing some of these issues, or seeing a psychiatrist. So that's something I wanted to say. How does anyone reach yourself if they wanted to, especially from the Muslim community, sir?
Yes, I work with the Khalil Center, which is the nation's largest provider of Muslim mental health services. I'm in Los Angeles. You can look up our website, khalilcenter.com, and my profile is there on the website, and my contact information. And I'm happy to connect with anybody anytime.
Thank you very much. And before I end, I just wanted to let our viewers know, firstly, thank you for watching this all the way to the end with this very heavy topic. I'm sure there's a lot more conversations to be had, more questions may have arisen. If you have those questions, please do put them in the comment section, and hopefully I'll be able to direct them to the right individuals, if not Sheikh Sohail himself. There will be contact information for anyone who has what we call suicide ideations or thinking about harming themselves or even others. I'll be putting down the National Suicide Hotline number. I'll also be putting down the details of the Khalil Center. And hopefully I'll be, if I can find the details of the Towhid family in any way, we can help them, even though they're not with us today. If there's a way we can help their legacy, hopefully there'll be their details in the YouTube channel's description. Thank you again to Sheikh Sohail for the in-depth conversation and being able to try and understand this and to grapple this with us. And thank you to your viewers. And I just want to end this with a prayer that we pray for the Tawheed family, that in, I think the English terms would be, may they rest in peace. And for us, from a Muslim point of view, may they enter into paradise with both their feet securely, and whether they left with such abruptness, but may they enter into paradise with calm and contentment that I think they were all looking for. Thank you again, and we'll see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.